this is Patsy with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And we have lots of stories today because my guest is Robert Dugoni, and it is so wonderful. He is an international best-selling author. He's written some of my absolute favorite books, and I am so happy to welcome you here today. Hi, Bob.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me. Nice to see you again. I guess I'm
Thank
seeing
you
you
for
for the first
joining
time.
me. St. Patrick's Day will be the 10th anniversary of my radio program
Wow,
and the first
congratulations.
anniversary of the YouTube channel.
Great. Terrific. That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you, because I started it 10 years ago when I started on St. Patrick's Day. It turned out to be a very lucky day for me. And of course, it was a Tuesday then. And Tuesdays, as in the book world, that's the release date for most books. So it turned
Yes.
out to be perfect. And also, I was married on a Tuesday. There were so many things that were this was wonderful when I started the program, which is so funny because when I started the radio program, I had only thought about it 2 weeks before. And within 2 weeks, I was on the radio, which was absolutely surprising because I didn't know any authors. And I just like an impulse. And I started.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the guy behind the window in the control room, they had a bet that I wouldn't last a month. The only author I did know was a nice lady who wrote a casserole book. And so when I started the program, I thought if worst comes to worst, I could have her on and she'd bring a casserole for to the studio. And everybody would be happy at least for a day. But somehow I clung on, and one of my first guests was Douglas Brunt.
Oh,
He was my fourth guest. And I was so thrilled to talk to him that after that I said, oh, if I can talk to him, I can talk to anybody. So here I am years later. As I said, we've talked on the radio. And over the time, I missed some of your books because development didn't help us at all. And then I moved from Florida to Texas. But I wanted to talk, particularly, I wanted to start with The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell. You know, books come and go in this world. And if you don't keep promoting them, they just get lost. It's that river is really big out there, and there's a lot of books out there. And so sometimes a book that is, I think it has relevance, and it's something that I was so taken with. So I wanted to talk first about this one, but then we're going to get on to some of the other ones that I love too. But this one, it's back 2018. There's such a story behind it, such a beautiful story about how the idea came. And I'll let you tell it because it's really a beautiful story. But I always remember when I first read it, and then later on I listened to the Audible, which you narrated, right?
I did. Yes.
And that's quite an accomplishment for an author too. But the story, it was so moving, and then the story behind it was even more moving. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that because I do remember when you talked about your brother and the
Yeah.
influence of that. So people talk so often about the value of life. And then one little change in and I suppose that's exactly why it's extraordinary. You just tell the story because it's a beautiful story.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I was an outliner. I used to outline my books, and I would find that within a couple of days of writing, I'd suddenly be off my outline. And I read a book by Stephen King, his book on writing, and he talked about how he didn't outline, and he talked about how basically books were transcendent, that authors wrote them and people in different towns and different places who they've never met and never visited picked up the book and it had meaning to them. And so I decided I was going to give that a try because I really wasn't outlining much to begin with. And one morning I woke up about 4:30 in the morning. I had this young boy talking to me, and he was talking about growing up in Burlingame, California, which is where I grew up. But he was an only child, and I grew up with 9 siblings. So it wasn't me. But this boy had a story to tell. And honestly, I just listened to it and I just started to transcribe it. And ironically, um, he just kept talking to me. And he was the story was coming so fast and so furious that I have two screens, and on one I was writing the story, and on the other screen I was putting next chapter because I just couldn't get to it quickly enough. And the book really is a story of a young boy who is born with a handicap, an infirmity. And I didn't really know what that was at that time. I have a younger brother that was born with Down syndrome. And Michael doesn't really understand completely that he's different. He's fairly severely handicapped. And I didn't, it was too close for me to write a book about a boy with Down syndrome. And that subject matter has been broached a little bit already. So here I had this story, but I really didn't know what this handicap was of this young boy. And I was reading the Sunday paper one day, and there was a small little article. It was only about that big, and it was about a boy born with ocular albinism in Australia who was denied admittance to the Catholic school because they thought he'd be a disruption to the classroom because he was known as the devil boy, and they called him the devil boy. And boy, I thought to myself, there's serendipity for you. Rarely there's irony that here's a story that I've written about a young boy going through Catholic school where he's bullied. And then I find this thing, this small article, and he's called the Devil Boy, and I have this character named Sam Hell. It was just, everything was just coming together. I called him Sam Hell because my dad used to say that to my brothers and I. What the Sam Hell were you thinking? What the Sam Hell are you doing? It was like the idea was given to me. And so I went back and I wrote the story of this boy with ocular albinism. He has red eyes, and he's trying to fit in at this school, and he's bullied not only by some of his classmates, but he's also bullied by some of the teachers there. And there are also wonderful teachers there that and he's a smart kid. He's a very intuitive kid. And I really wasn't sure where the story was going or how it was going to come out. But my editor at Amazon Publishing was very open to it, very open to reading it. And when she read it, she said, I really like it, but I think it's a literary novel. And she was publishing my mystery novels, my Tracy Crosswhite novels. So it went to the editor at Lake Union Publishing, and she just adored it. She loved it. She cautioned me. She said that these kind of books have a little bit slower plateau. It's not like mysteries, which come out of the gate. And she was absolutely right. But this book now is about 7 years old. We've surpassed 1 million readers. We've surpassed, I don't know how many other hundreds of thousands of listeners. And I've just been very blessed, very lucky that the story has just continued to pick up steam. I'm still doing book clubs. It's still one of my highest selling books every single month. It's just a book I think that resonates with a lot of people because it's not a story about religion. It's a story about faith and hope. And I think especially during the COVID years and now during these years that we've had some tough times, I think that's a message that a lot of people find really resonates with them.
That's what I felt too. Over the years, I talked to new authors, up and coming authors, and they'll tell me which authors influenced them. But I have had over the years people mentioning this book, authors who are writing maybe not even a novel, they're writing their own memoirs and things. They relate to this book, they remember this book. You're famous for your mysteries and suspenses, and to come out with a book that's not in that genre, to come out with something different. Sometimes people say it's brave. Oh, he's got a brand, and stick with the brand. Even if you're in the mystery of the thriller business, you have a brand, but you can expand. We have so many things within us, so many things that we've seen in our lives and done in our lives that might not fit into one genre, and to do another one, and like to take this chance because in a way, you probably wouldn't have gotten it published very easily if you weren't already famous. But still, to keep it going, as you say, people want to hear about it, people want to talk about it. So you have to be so open. And in this case with Sam, you put him through a lot. you give Sam a lot of problems. Tell us a little more about the story, because when you do these events, people want to know the storyline of his friends, and it's a process that you went through. And one thing, of course, his mother. Now, your mother was obviously had a great influence on you, and having 10 children, she had a great influence on all of you. How did you play around with Sam's mother? and she's really a very strong character all the way to the end, all the way to the epilogue. When
Yeah.
we hit that, I love that epilogue, by the way. I have it on, of course, Audible, and I've listened to it a couple of times just because I love the epilogue.
Thank you. Yeah, in many respects, I did write this as a tribute to my mother. She's a remarkable lady. She's 92 years old. She's gravely ill right now. She's in hospice, and I don't know how much longer we're going to have her. But the things that she accomplished in her life, she used to say to us, it was a very good life, but it wasn't an easy life. And I think that's something that a lot of us can say, that we've had good lives, but it's not necessarily easy. And raising a young boy with Down syndrome was not easy, especially back in those days. Mike is 50 now, so this was back in the 1970s, and she became a pioneer for handicapped children getting into regular schools, being regularly educated, all those things. So it was a lot of difficulty. She's worried about him, I know, tremendously, when he moved out of the house and he moved into a group home and those kind of things. And rightfully, there are still, unfortunately, people out there that will take advantage of people. In some respects, I wrote this as a tribute to my mom and her resilience and her strength. But also, Sam has a network that he draws upon. He has Mickey and Ernie. Mickey is a tomboy, doesn't really fit in with the girls at school. And Ernie's one of the few black kids in the entire city that Sam grows up in Burlingame, California, and he's the only black child in the school. So really, what you have is you have these three misfits that come together and become the best of friends. Mickey becomes Sam's conscience. She's always the one telling Sam that he's underestimating himself, that he deserves better, but he can't see that yet, which is one of the points of the story. Is even though Sam has this ocular albinism, right, he can't see how good he is. He can't see how smart he is. He can't let himself accept that he's normal, that he's okay. And Mickey is his conscience. She doesn't let him wallow in that. And Ernie is very similar. He's a young man who's going to overcome the difference in the color of his skin. He proves that it's irrelevant, and he goes on to do terrific and wonderful things. I just wanted to write a book that was inspirational, that people would put down and wonder what happened to these characters and where they are and what goes on in their lives. Because I think we all do that a little bit ourselves, right? I'm shocked that the book has been out for 7 years. I feel like it came out last month because I talk about it so often, and so many people email me and they say, I miss Sam. They close the book and they miss him. They miss the characters in that book because they become so close to them. They become like friends. And it's tough. It's tough to lose a friend. I just lost a friend to basically a heart attack. And it's tough because they're gone. And it's so many people have read this book multiple times. And then Newsweek magazine surprised me about 6 months ago, and they named it one of the best books of all time. And that just brought tears to my eyes, because when you are a writer, you never set out to write a book that's going to be considered one of the best books of all time by a prestigious magazine like Newsweek. You just write a story and you hope that it resonates with readers. And to have somebody tell you that it has resonated with readers and it will forever, it makes it a little bit easier to know that my mom's going to be passing, because she's not really going to be passing. She's immortal. She'll always be the mother in the book, The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell.
That's exactly what I was thinking too. Let's just explain a little bit about the disease.
It's ocular albinism, and my understanding in talking to a couple of friends that are optometrists is that it's a form of albinism, but it's a form that can range from it has a wide range. And a lot of people with ocular albinism end up losing their eyesight. They end up going blind, but there's nothing that impacts their intellect or anything like that. But it's a wide range. And so I wanted to create a character who had this infirmity, but he was otherwise completely and totally normal. In fact, he's a little bit better than normal. He's very smart. He's very intuitive. He understands that he's being bullied because of the color of his eyes. He understands that he's being discriminated against because of the color of his eyes. And in some respects, that's even more painful than someone like my brother that doesn't understand why people are being mean to him or not being kind to him. Sam understands it, and it makes it all the more painful.
Let's talk about your background, how you got into writing in the first place, because you had a different background.
Yeah, I did. In fact, I'm preparing to give a talk, to go back and give a talk for a fundraiser at my high school. that's the keynote speaker, and so I've been putting it all together. Basically, I always wanted to be an athlete, right? I wanted to be a star athlete and all that stuff. But at a very young age, my mom used to take us to the Burlingame Library, and the short of a long story is I fell in love with books. Around every corner in the stacks in those libraries, there was another character waiting for me to discover, kings and queens and Aragorn and you name it. And so at a really young age, I had read a lot of the classic books like The Old Man and the Sea and A Mice and Men, The Count of Monte Cristo, The Great Gatsby. It's just a wide range because I just fell in love with stories. I fell in love with the characters in books and in stories. And so from the seventh grade on, I had a wonderful nun, Sister Mary Williams, who's also in The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell, as an honor to her. I wanted to tell stories, but I come from a family of compulsive overachievers, I like to call them. They're all doctors and lawyers and very successful. And so I took a different path, and I ended up going to law school and getting an education in law. So I'd always have something to fall back on, and became a lawyer. I practiced law for 13 years. And I woke up one morning and just almost weeping. I realized this is not what I had planned for my life. It's not what I wanted to do with my life. And I said to my wife, I can't do this anymore. And she had a very short answer for me. She said, then we won't. And we moved to Seattle, which is where she's from. And I took out an office in downtown Pioneer Square. And I started writing novels and failing miserably, 40, 50 rejections. And it wasn't until I learned the craft of writing, found books on the craft of writing, and started studying the craft and how stories are told and how characters evolve and develop, that I really began to understand how to put a book together, how to put a story together. And I was at a party one time for my son's, a friend of my son's. He was 6 years old, and at this party was a former FBI agent who's now an environmental protection agent. And he started telling me this story about this kid that had been badly injured in Southeast Idaho, and he had been the main agent investigating it. And it was an incredible story, just unbelievable story. And I ended up writing it with him, called The Cyanide Canary, and that's what put me on the map. That's what got me an agent. Instead of having no acceptances, I had 10 acceptances, and here I had this book. The book came out, and it didn't do anything. It was very frustrating. It's an incredible story, but it really didn't do anything. And part of that is just the difficulty of getting a publisher behind your book to really promote it and push it. But the good news was my agent saw potential in me. And so she asked for my other books that I had been writing that had been rejected. And now I had credentials, right? And she read them and she loved them. And so those books came out, the David Sloan series, legal thrillers. But again, I hit a wall. I was told by my publisher they didn't want any more of those books, and thank you, but see you later, which really pushed me in another direction. And people talk all the time about one door closing, another door opens, but you have to look for that other door. You have to make sure that you're not wallowing in self-pity, and you're looking for that other door that's going to open for you. And I found that door, and I opened it, and I wrote My Sister's Grave with Tracy Crosswhite, a female homicide detective, the first female homicide detective in Seattle. And it went viral. It went crazy. It just sold, I think we've sold 2.5 million copies or something. It just really went nuts. And I'm working on the 12th book in that series. But it's like what you said, and I tell this to students. I teach the craft of writing now in a thing called the Novel Writing Intensive. And I tell my students all the time, there's a lot of luck involved in everything we do in life. And there's a lot of luck involved in writing. But luck is basically when opportunity and preparedness meet. And so I got an opportunity and I was prepared for that opportunity. Now, was I lucky? Of course I was lucky. I just happened to be the guy that Amazon wanted to, they wanted me to be a part of their publishing process. But I was also prepared for it. And that book was incredibly successful. And the rest of the Tracy Crosswhite has been incredibly successful. And that opened my ability to do books like The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell and The World Played Chess. And most recently, the book Hold Strong, the World War II saga. And that's what I love to do. I don't want to write just one thing. I want to tell stories. And I don't care what the genre is, as long as it's a good story.
I don't know if you remember that when you were on the radio program and we talked about The World Played Chess, that I was crying. I started crying. I was crying all the way to the end of that interview. And I remember Big Ed in the control room said, "My goodness, I've done a lot of radio programs." And he says, "I never get anybody who starts crying." But I just couldn't help it because it was so moving. You have to explain this book because I was really taken with it. And I think readers have also, again, this is a very important story. It covers a period of time. For so many people, we have family members or we know people who have gone through the Vietnam War. We still hear about veterans from the Vietnam War who are suffering so much, who have not been taken care of in the way that they should. I actually have been working for years on a project for the warriors who were forgotten. These are the guys who flew the Thud jets over Hanoi,
Yeah.
and because of the embarrassment of not taking care of these people, they get no notice. But tell us a little bit about the world played chess because it's an important story too.
Yeah, it is. It's not a war book as much as it's a period piece. It's more historical. The Vietnam War changed this country. A lot of people think that the assassination of John Kennedy it was a pivoting point in this country's history, and I'm sure that it was. But I think it came about at the same time as the Vietnam War, and I think it was the Vietnam War that really was the pivot that changed the course of people's lives because there was no glory in the Vietnam War, not like World War I or World War II, where our soldiers came home and we honored them. It was a politicized war. There was just a tremendous amount of protests against the war. It was just it was a pivot point, and the story is really about a pivot point in a young man's life in 1979 when he goes to work on a construction crew with two Vietnam veterans, and he gets the education of a lifetime. That really happened to me. My summer year of high school, I got a job on a construction crew with two Vietnam veterans, and these guys were in Vietnam when they were my age. I was 18 years old at the time, and they wouldn't talk about the war unless they'd had a couple beers, and then the stories they would tell were just horrific and made me realize there was nothing romantic about the Vietnam War. There was nothing romantic about war either. People die, people get killed, hopes and dreams are lost, they're destroyed. And so I wrote this story about this young boy's experience, and he's now 40 years old, and he's got a son, and he's trying to teach his son these same lessons in life that he learned. And I let my son read it, he was about 20 at the time, because a little bit of it is about his life as well, and I wanted to make sure he was comfortable. And he's the one that came back to me, Patty, and said, "I don't know anything about the Vietnam War. Nobody talks about the Vietnam War. It's not taught in any schools. It's not taught in our classrooms. We learn about World War I and World War II. We don't know anything about it." And so I created a journal of one man's year spent in Vietnam, and that's William. And he's one of the guys on the construction crew. And I tell the story through a journal, William's journal, about what he goes through as an 18-year-old young man. So you have three parallel lives, really. You have 18-year-old William, you have 18-year-old Vincent, who's now the father, and you have 18-year-old Bo. And it's a coming-of-age story during a pivotal point in this country's history.
All of your books are great. I like that you're doing book talks and book events about the extraordinary life of Sam Hell, because I know when I used to be president of several different women's clubs, and we would do these wonderful book clubs. And I think that it's so important, really, in a group when you get to talk to an author and people get to understand, because this is a way to spread the word too. Because a book like this, as I said, if it's just floating down that river and nobody hears about it, you have to keep coming back. You have to have these events. You have to talk about it because you don't want this to be lost, because it is one of these books. When they gave it the award that it was one of the best of all time, it's true. People will read this book 50 years from now, 100 years from now. And it is a tribute in many ways to your mother, Patty. And the ideas behind it, you managed to really grip the reader with understanding and thinking about their own reaction to people. How do they react to somebody? What would they do if they saw somebody with this disease or that disease? And I know that it opens people's eyes. That's the great value of what you've done with this book.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Now, of course, one of the things I have been crazy about your newest series. I can tell you, when I started it, I said to myself, this is so good. I love Keera. I'm going to tell you, just the family, everything about this series. And this is book 2, Beyond Reasonable Doubt. I like everything you've done with this because you created an environment, a family. You see all those years as a lawyer, really, it gave you a lot of material and a lot of understanding. So, um, tell us about this series. I know this is book 2. Book 3 is already done because I'm
Book three is done. Book 3 is called Her Cold Justice. That will be out, I think, sometime later in 2025.
yeah. One of the reasons I want to talk about it is this is one of the few books that I have paid for. I
No,
actually I don't pay. I don't have to buy books. I get 8 to 10 books a week,
yeah,
and publishers will send me books, and they say, check these out. Which ones do you want? Now, as I said, I moved from Florida to Texas, and so in somewhere along the line, it was at the time that they were sending out this book, and I didn't get it, so it was lost in transit somehow. And when I didn't get it, I wasn't ready to talk to you on release date because I don't talk about books that I haven't read. But then I said to myself, oh, I had waited. I waited up until almost the last week. I kept saying, where is it? I sent emails, and then finally I said, oh my goodness, yeah. So I missed the interview date, so I bought it. I paid money. I don't. So you know that I have to love you if I'm going to pay for a book. So tell us.
I'm honored. The editor said to me, "Would you be willing to do another legal thriller series?" Which was surprising, to be honest. And I said, "Sure, but I want to write a Bob Dugoni legal thriller. I don't want to write a legal thriller that everybody else is writing. I want it to have my stamp on it, my brand, if you will." And that meant I wanted it to have police procedural aspects of it, and I wanted it to have family dynamics. And so what I did is I created this law firm in which these women sisters, the Duggon sisters, work for their father, Patsy Duggon. And Patsy Duggon is a famous criminal defense lawyer in Seattle. He's called the Irish Brawler, and he's an unbelievable lawyer, unbelievable trial attorney, but he's also an alcoholic. And it's had an impact on each of his daughters. Each of his daughters has been impacted by his alcoholism, and they're trying to get past that. And Keera is the youngest. She's an oops baby. She's 10 years younger than her next sister, Maggie, and so she's always considered the little girl. But Keera takes after her father in that she's a chess prodigy. She's an incredible chess player. She's incredibly intuitive. She's incredibly bright. She's able to pivot and turn. And of course, these are also traits that make for a great trial attorney. So when Keera has to go work for her father because of some things that happened in her life, it's something she swore she would never do. She'd never work for her dad. She goes to work for him, and she becomes the firm's trial attorney. So you have Keera, you have Meg, her sister Meg, who's the oldest sister, who runs the firm, and then you have the youngest sister is Maggie, and they're working with their dad, and his alcoholism is starting to finally have its impact on him. He's having trouble remembering things. He's having trouble in court, and Keera more and more has to step in. And so that's really what the stories are about. The stories are about cases that come to Keera. The first book in the series is called Her Deadly Game. It's based on a true story that took place in Seattle regarding an unscrupulous investor that stole a lot of people's millions of dollars and was tried, and then I fictionalized it. And Keera becomes the trial attorney in Her Beyond Reasonable Doubt. She's representing a young woman that's also a prodigy, since she's known her since she was a little girl. And this woman is incredibly bright, but she's also a pathological liar. And she gets indicted for murder. And Keera steps in to defend her. And the problem is she never knows when this woman is telling her the truth and when she's lying, because she's been a pathological liar, a sociopath, since Keera was a little kid. And so Keera doesn't really want to do it, but the father wants her to do it because they knew these people when they were young and they're family friends, and he owes the father a favor. So she does. So there's a lot going on in these stories. There's a lot of dynamics going on in these stories between father and daughter, between family, brothers and sisters. And it's a big family. There's 5 kids, two brothers who are both recovering alcoholics. And I don't want to say I had a lot of fun writing the book because it's some serious subject matter, but I did have a lot of fun writing the book. I think Keira's a great character, and the third book will be out. Her Cold Justice be out sometime in 2025. And then after that, I think I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell the story of the Irish brawler. I'm going to go back in time and tell the story of Patsy Duggan and how he became the Irish brawler. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun.
What I love about the story, also the city takes an important part of this story. The environment, the research element of this story. Tell us about. I love the plot. I love the idea. When I started it, I said, "Oh boy, what is the link here? What is going on here with the research? Because this is an area of the world, they are doing so much research in this area of the world. There are so many entrepreneurs, there are so many investment opportunities and new companies and new ideas. So that plays an important part. And when we have this character who is a pathological liar, what a character. You have created somebody who really, I think, sometimes we have things torn out of the headlines. There are, I think we're more and more aware of very strong women who might have something wrong with them.
Yeah, people liken the book a lot to Elizabeth, I'm drawing a blank on her name, who was basically indicted for running a company that was fraudulent. And
Jenna Bernstein is
but,
Jenna. I know the name of the woman, but I didn't want to say it because I didn't know you get sued and stuff. But
yeah, no,
your
the
character
reality
is great. Jenna is.
Yeah, the reality of the story is that I got the idea from a friend of mine who is a doctor who has Parkinson's. And I was talking to him one day about an idea I had, and he's the one that suggested that I create a startup company that is seemingly on the cusp of coming up with a way to maybe not cure Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, but to certainly treat it and delay the symptoms so that people can live healthy lives much later than now. And so he gave me the idea and led me in the direction of this research that's being done, in which they can modify skin cells and they can change skin cells on the nuclear level to any cell that they want, including cells that distribute dopamine and other things that help people that have these diseases. And so what they're really selling is they're selling hope, right? They're selling hope that they can cure these diseases that in fact impact so many Americans. And that's really where the idea came from. And I really didn't even know about this other woman and the company that she had started that deals with blood diseases until after I was well into the book. And I think it might have been one of my agents who said, this is a lot like this character. And I really didn't know that I understand it. So the book didn't really come out, the genesis for the story didn't come from that. Even though it seems like it's ripped from the headlines, it came from a very personal place. This friend of mine that gave me the idea to move forward with it.
I think that's what makes it so fascinating, because I realized too that this came from someplace, this idea. And Jenna is how you write Jenna. You capture her. And I think we now are very distrustful of some of these big companies who come out with ideas. And then this one particularly, where you're talking about nanoparticles and all of this stuff that's involved. And it's possible. There are people, I have spoken to people in Silicon Valley, and I've had some authors write books, and where they're talking about they want to live forever. There are people in Silicon Valley, and I'm sure also in all of these other places, they want to live forever. And they are actually funding this research, big research, major research, to look into how they can live forever. And a few of them I'm thinking, oh, please, I don't know if we want you to live forever. But they are, and they're going to extraordinary lengths. And it is frightening, because we don't know what they will inject in us, or what they will. We don't know that. And so that's why I think this story will really resonate with people. I know, as I said, I paid for this book, and I got my value in that book, and it's worth every penny, because it's exciting. You have all this aspects of being a thriller and the science part. And I can see that this, although it's a difficult book in many ways because you had some technical stuff, but it must have been interesting to follow this path along. What is the potential? What can they do to us?
These, if they're successful in doing this, they're going to be able to create cells that can go in and fix your heart. If you have a heart that's failing, they'll create new cells that will go in and fix your heart without operating on it. You have a kidney that's failing, a liver that's failing. They can create the cells that are needed to go in and do all this stuff without cutting you open and all that stuff. This idea of living forever, yeah, I don't know how close we are to it, but certainly they're reaching the point where they can create things so that our internal organs, which keep us alive. And now there's research out there that are talking about anti-aging, the ability to turn back the clock or at least slow the clock. There's a lot of other issues that brings up. The world can only sustain so many people. There's only so many resources for the world to sustain, and if people aren't dying at the same rate that people are being born, then where does that take us? Where does that leave us? So there's a whole lot of ethical and moral and other kinds of questions that are raised, which I think is what makes the book resonate with a lot of people, because it really impacts everybody. And I don't know what the answer is going to be. I just found it very fascinating to research it and to create a book that's based upon that premise.
Of course, the people in Silicon Valley who are investing hundreds of millions of dollars, and some of it is very secret research that you don't know what they're doing. I think they're designing it for themselves more than they're not handing it out to everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also part of the problem. It's, I don't know, it's scary. But when you capture, now the interesting thing here is Keera and Jenna are friends, and they've been friends for years. And explain how you created this relationship with them. I get such a kick out of Keera. I must say, I love her dad. I
Yeah.
From the minute he steps in the story, you have to love him.
Yeah, Kira and Jenna are frenemies. They're friends, but they're enemies. They're in the same class. But Jenna is smart enough to understand Jenna, and some of the other girls in her class are not. Kira is smart enough to know that Jenna has got a problem, that Jenna lies, that Jenna is sociopathic, that she's pathological, that she's not really a friend. And they finally have a falling out their senior year in high school, and they don't see each other again for almost 10 years. And then suddenly she shows up and she's in trouble. And Kira's not the least bit surprised that she's in trouble, because she never once believed that Jenna was doing all the things she said she was doing in creating this company. She always thought that there had to be a fraud behind it because she knows Jenna so well. The story sort of goes back in time and tells the relationship about how these two girls happen to be at the same school and their parents want them to be friends. But you have this little girl, Keera, who's very intuitive, and she very at a young age begins to suspect and realize that Jenna is not a nice person. She's not a good person. And I'm a father that has two kids, and I can remember one of my kids having a friend that was like that. The parents were lovely, and we wanted them to be friends together. And my child, they just had some real reservations that turned out to be legitimate. And it's a scary thing. It's a very scary thing. And as a lawyer, I dealt with some people that were sociopathic. I'm sure they were sociopathic, the way that they just took advantage of other people in business and just didn't think anything of it. Basically, they felt, if I'm smarter than you and you're too stupid to know that I'm ripping you off, that's not my fault, that's yours. And those people really do exist.
In recent years, it's been all of this. If you're not a woman, you can't write about men. If you're a woman, you can't write about men. All this question, you get into the head of women seems to me, very easily.
I've been very fortunate to have a lot of very strong women in my life. My mom was a very strong woman, a businesswoman. My sisters are all business women. They're strong people. And my wife runs a business, and she's a strong woman, but they're also very feminine. And I think that's the thing that is very appealing about Keera, is as strong as she is, she's also very feminine. And she wants some of the things in life that we all want. She wants a family. She'd like to have kids. She'd like to have a good home life and that kind of thing. But I think for too many years, we thought that those two things had to be exclusive, right? And they don't, obviously. And I worked with a lot of very strong women when I was a lawyer. And so I've pulled from all of those different sources to create the character of Tracy Crosswhite in the Tracy Crosswhite series and Keera Duggon in the Keera Duggon series. These women that are very competent and at what they do. They're very good at what they do. They are strong. They are smart. They're intelligent. They're intuitive. But at the same time, they have a gentle side to them. They have a soft side to them. I think any father will have to admit that when your child is hurt or doesn't feel well or is sick, who do they go to first? They usually go to the mom, right? Usually. And I think that's because their moms have that compassion button inside of them, that empathetic button inside of them. I think it's genetic in some respects. I think fathers are a lot of times prone to say, suck it up. That's life. Life is hard. Move on. And so I know for myself, when something was going wrong in my life, I always called my mom. It wasn't my dad, it was my mom. Those are characters I think that are just multi-layered, and I think they make for fascinating characters in books. And I really feel blessed that so many people have read my stuff and feel that way about the female characters that I've written.
As you mentioned, for Sam Hell, your editor had ideas and suggestions how to make it better, what to take out, what to put in. Now, with your thrillers, and particularly with this one, an author has to have when you're writing a thriller, you have to have a certain arc. They talk about the arc of how to build up the tension and how to lead to that ending. And I'm not going to say anything about this ending because people have to read the book, because you have when we say a surprise ending, sometimes it's really comes as a surprise. But how easy is it for you to come with that emotional arc that you need for keeping readers interested in a thriller?
Oh, it's never easy. It's never easy, especially when you sit down and you just start a story and you're not really sure where the story is going to go or how it's going to develop. So one of the things I teach my students is don't edit yourself on the first draft. Don't sit there and take things out and cut, because you never know what's going to be relevant and what's not going to be relevant until you've written the whole book. So I try to write the entire book, and then when I go back through my drafts, that's when I start to look more closely at what to cut, what to get rid of, and how is that character developing throughout the course of the story. But it's not easy. It's really not. And that's something that we writers struggle with, is you want to create a book that is intricate enough that the reader doesn't necessarily see what's coming next, but you don't want it to be so intricate that it's confusing, or you don't want it to be so intricate that the reader just throws up their hands and says, come on. I take a cue from my dad. When I was young, my dad used to have me sit down and watch all the classic movies with him. On the Waterfront, Trapeze, you name it. And one of the things that my dad was always trying to do was get me to figure out the ending. What happened? And he'd say to me things like, you remember the guy that came into the hotel room? And I'll say, Dad, don't tell me. Don't tell me. That's what readers and viewers of mysteries want to do, is they want to solve the crime. And so you can't make it coincidental. You can't make it so intricate that everyone goes, what? You got to make it, there's a balance there where the reader feels like, yeah, you know what? I suspected that. And that makes people feel good.
And your books make people feel good. And the ending to this book, it's very special. So
Thank you.
now you mentioned here that you teach writing. Explain where, I know once people see this interview, they'll say, where is this? Where's this place? How can they take lessons with you?
The best thing to do is just go online and type in thenovelwritingintensive.com. All one word, thenovelwritingintensive.com. And our administrator's name is Pam Johnson. So if you pull up the web page, you should see a picture of me. You should see a picture of my co-teacher, Stephen James, who's a fantastic writing instructor. And then you'll know you're on the right page. And you'll see the administrator is Pam Johnson. And you can get on the wait list. We teach once a year. We teach 2 classes, 3.5 days each, once a year. This year we're going to be in Nashville, Tennessee. So that'll be fun. And you just get on the wait list, and Pam will get in touch with you. And what we do is we have writers submit the first 50 pages of the novel they're working on. And those 50 pages are critiqued by either me or Stephen. And we use those in the classes that we're teaching to try to help people to understand how a story is usually told, and how a story unfolds and how characters can be developed.
So these
In person. During COVID, we did by Zoom. It's much less personal. It's very impersonal when you do it that way. We teach. It's like an immersion program. We eat meals, all our meals together. We have all our free time together. We all stay in the same location, in the same hotel or bed and breakfast. It's 24/7. So it's very collegial. We've had just some really lovely experiences, and I've met some really wonderful human beings from all over the country, from other countries as well. You walk out of there kind of feeling like you've gone to camp, writing camp, which is what we want.
Oh, that's a wonderful thing. I love those in-person camps. I think they're really helpful in so many ways. One, for an author to somebody who's starting off and trying to learn, to be around really talented authors is great. And of course, I'm sure anybody who's studying with you is going to learn a lot, because just reading your books is sometimes a lesson in and of itself. So people can analyze your books, and when you're reading, you mentioned that you're a great reader. Tell us first, what's the oldest book you have? Do you have What's your oldest book?
That goes back a long way because I inherited my wife's grandmother's library. So I actually have books by Milton in the 1800s. I have an original version of The Wizard of Oz, and I have one of the original books of the Arabian Nights. So I have some really classic books and stories that I've been very fortunate to have in my possession. I'll tell you the book that I think had one of the biggest influences on me. There were actually two. One was Lonesome Dove. I read that when I was 30 years old. And when I finished reading that book, I just wept because Captain Call is going home to Lonesome Dove and all his friends are dead and he's alone. And it was a point in my life that it was very poignant. And I remember weeping, and I remember realizing that's the power of a good story. That's what the power of a good story can do for you. And the other one was The Count of Monte Cristo. And I read that at a very young age because I just remember being enamored by the idea that how Edmond Dantes gets out of the island prison. I don't know. It's incredible. It's an incredible imagination that writer had. And it was just really, truly something that always stuck with me.
Certainly, as you said, your mother took you to the library at a young age, and this is so important. And one of the things I try to encourage people always, bring your children to the library, give them books. The more they read, the better. It is so sad that we have really such an enormous number of kids today who cannot read well. And it really, you have to take just, if they get involved in books at a very young age, it will stick with them.
You're never alone when you have a good book.
That's it. That's it. Absolutely. Now, of course, you're coming up. Thriller Fest is coming up. You're going to be at it this year?
I'm going to be at Thriller Fest this year. I'm on the board of directors of Thriller Fest this is my first year on the board of directors. I will be there. It is a terrific event held in New York City. Lots of classes, lots of panels, lots of discussions on books, on writing, on how to write. So whether you are a fan, John Grisham's going to be there this year. Some other really prominent lawyers, some prominent writers are always there. So it's a great place if you're a reader to come and buy a book and get it autographed. If you're a writer and you're looking for tips on the craft of writing, it's just a great opportunity to do that.
Now, I think this is last year there was a contest for best first sentence. And I think this is the one that you selected, right?
Yes, I did. And they have it every year. And I had Susanna, I got a chance to do it. And because that's the one I selected, I got to read the first few pages of her novel, which is just really, I think it's going to be a great book. But yeah, there are some really terrific first sentences.
So what grabbed you about this one? Mom always said, don't talk about murder at dinner. I can see one reason, because you had a strong mom.
I did. It's just there's such a dichotomy there, right? Who's going to sit down and talk about murder at dinner unless you're in a mafia family or something, right? So I just think it's the best first sentences are those sentences that raise a question for the reader. And the reader wants to keep reading because they're curious. And that is a very curious first sentence.
Now, you yourself, most of your sentences, when you open, I'm trying to look back at thinking back to your first sentences, most of them are quite long. You don't have a lot of short, pithy sentences, if I'm correct. I do remember one. It's the jury master, which I love very much. And that one was memorable because you're talking about the jury, and they shuffled into the courtroom like 12 of San Francisco's homeless, shoulders hunched and heads bowed, as if searching the sidewalk for spare change. Now, that's very evocative.
Thank you. Yeah, because if jurors don't look at you and you're the attorney or the accused, that's a bad sign. Usually that's a bad sign. Yeah, like I said, I try to make the first sentence of every chapter and a question, something curious, so the reader is compelled to read through the next chapter and on. And that's the goal, is to write a book that a reader can't put down.
And when I was thinking about your books, and as I said, I think many of them open up. I think most of them seem to open up with a prologue. You have?
Yeah, yes and no. I don't know. I think I have a couple that don't have a prologue. Prologues can be a little tricky because some readers love them and some readers don't. They want to just dive into the story. So the big thing that I teach my students is, whatever you decide to do, that first chapter has to be catching. It has to be something that catches the reader's interest, and whether it's the prologue or the first chapter, whatever you want to call it. It's got to be something that just comes out of the gate and catches their interest right away.
You use the prologue very effectively. There's something in that prologue. We're going to have the payoff at some point. I think they're great. I think all of your books are great. And I want to thank you so much for joining me today on Joy on Paper Live. It's always a joy to talk to you. And now you just have to make sure that I'm back on your publisher's list and they have my correct address, so I get the next book before everybody else. I don't mind paying for a book if it's really great by somebody like you. I do like to get the joy of actually doing this program is that I get them months before everybody else. And so I know what's happening. I do.
No.
I tease sometimes people. I say, I know. And they'll say, tell us what's going to happen.
No, thank you for having me on, Patsy. And can I also wish you a happy 10-year anniversary? That's quite an achievement, and congratulations to you. And thank you for 10 years of promoting reading and writers, and that's really a great testament to you.
Thank you. I love every minute of it. I just want to show people your website. It's right there. That's the correct one, right?
That is robertdugonibooks.com.
Okay, robertdugonibooks.com. And I think also you're on all the social media that you need to be on, as much as you can take.
Because I am.
Sometimes it's a bit overwhelming. But
can be, yes.
Okay, so again, thank you. I love talking to authors on the release date, but I also love talking to authors about books that might have been published already. And I just want to remind my listeners and my viewers that there are so many great books out there. But if you get a Robert Dugoni book, you are a winner. Whatever book you get of Bob's, you will be happy. And because you are a great author, and I really want to thank you again. It's been a joy as I'm celebrating this sort of a Joy on Paper Live. Now, 1 year anniversary also for Joy on Paper Live. So 10 years on the radio, 1 year on YouTube, and I'm enjoying every minute. It is a joy to talk to authors who love writing.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye now. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Please subscribe to Joy on Paper Live so that I can bring you more interviews with fascinating authors. All you have to do is click that button, subscribe, comment, and share. Wouldn't it be wonderful to take a class with Robert Dugoni? Robert Dugoni's writing is compelling and evocative. You will enjoy these 3 books. The latest in his Keera Duggon thriller series, Beyond Reasonable Doubt. His coming-of-age story, The World Played Chess. The Life of Sam Hell is an inspiring story of redemption. Thank you for joining me today. Again, please subscribe, comment, and share. Bye-bye now.
Study writing?